Welcome back to the woods. Find a quiet place, maybe a cup of tea or something warm, and let's step together into a slower world, where the days pass gently and small creatures live simple, beautiful lives beneath the trees. Morning crept softly through the trees, pale and slow, carrying the faint scent of rain. A cool mist wound between the trunks, clinging to the moss and glistening on each blade of grass. The forest seemed to still itself, listening to the hush of the world waking. The hare stirred first. She lived near the edge of the meadow, in a snug little burrow lined with dried clover and feathergrass. She stretched, blinked twice, and stepped out into the damp air. The world smelled green and new. She stood for a moment, letting the dew soak in her fur, then hopped down toward the brook to wash her paws. Along the way, she met the mole, who was already up, though his eyes were half shut and his fur dusted with soil. He was pushing a small cart filled with roots, muttering to himself. "You're up early," said the hare, her breath puffing faintly in the cool. "I could say the same," grumbled the mole. "The rains loosen the tunnels. If I don't mend them, I'll have a pond instead of pantry." The hare smiled. "I don't suppose you'd mind a pond. I'd rather have peace and dry paws," he replied, pushing the cart onward. She laughed quietly and let him go. Down by the brook, she knelt beside the water, cold and clear as glass. The reflections of the branches wavered above her, and she dipped her paws in, shivering a little. The air had a weight to it today, not unpleasant, just different. She could feel it, a quiet shift that made her ears twitch. Something was changing. By the time she returned home, the sparrow had landed on her fence post, feathers puffed against the chill. "Good morning," chirped the sparrow brightly. "Lovely damp, isn't it?" "If you're a worm," said the hare, shaking water from her paws, "you're welcome to all of them." "Oh, don't tempt me," said the sparrow. "I might stay all morning." "Stay then," said the hare, "but help me bring in the beans. The wind might knock them over if it rains again." So they worked together, the hare untangling vines while the sparrow darted between the rows, tugging at loose strings and chattering about everything she'd seen from above. A fox down by the birch grove, a family of hedgehogs rustling through last year's leaves, a heron standing solemn and still near the farm marsh. When they were done, the hare sat on her doorstep, brushing her paws. The mist was lifting now, and thin beams of light slanted through the trees. The forest glistened. "Will you stay for breakfast?" she asked. The sparrow tilted her head. "What's on the menu?" "Something simple," said the hare. "Oatcakes with a bit of blackberry jam if you behave." The sparrow fluttered her wings. "You drive a fair bargain." Inside, the burrow was warm and tidy, with shelves made of old roots and a little table polished smooth by years of use. The hare stirred the batter while the sparrow sang near the window. Soon the smell of toasted oats filled the room. When they sat down, the sparrow pecked delicately at her portion, humming between bites. "You always make it taste like sunshine," she said. "It's just oats," said the hare. "Maybe," said the sparrow, "but you cook them as if it's something more." The hare smiled faintly, but said nothing. She liked mornings like this, quiet, simple, shared. Outside, a light breeze rippled the tall grass, and the mist had burned away completely, leaving the world clear and green. When a meal was done, the sparrow preened her feathers. "The wind's changing," she said softly. "I can feel it up high. Something's on its way." The hare looked out the window. "Autumn, perhaps." "Perhaps," said the sparrow. "Or something else entirely." They both fell silent, listening to the faint rustle of leaves beyond the burrow. The day went on. The mole patched his tunnels, the hare stacked her drying beans, and the forest hummed with its usual life. Yet beneath it all was that subtle difference. The air felt expectant, the breeze carried new scents, and the birds flew a little higher, their wings cutting the gray sky in slow, careful arcs. By dusk, The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of distant rain again. The hare lit her small lamp and settled in for the evening, listening to the faint patter on the leaves above. She didn't mind the rain, not tonight. It had a rhythm to it, steady and thoughtful. She made herself a pot of chamomile tea and watched the droplets gather on the window pane, one by one sliding down like slow-moving stars. The forest, she thought, always told its stories quietly. You just had to be still enough to hear them. The storm had passed in the night, quiet and thorough. By dawn, the forest lay washed clean, every leaf gleaming, every root dark with damp. The world seemed to breathe again. Mist clung low over the meadow, pooling in hollows and curling along the banks of the brook. The hare woke early, blinking into the pale light. Her burrow smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth and dried herbs. She rose, brushed her fur smooth, and stepped outside. The ground was soft beneath her feet, and the air was thick with the scent of wet moss and pine. Overhead, droplets fell like glass beads whenever a breeze stirred the canopy. Down by the brook, the water had swollen overnight, running fast and clear, carrying with it twigs, leaves, and the occasional lost feather. The hare stood for a while, watching it move. The rush and murmur of it were comforting, a steady sound that filled the space between thoughts. As she stooped to refill her pail, something caught her eye among the reeds, a glint small and bright. She reached for it and pulled free a smooth, polished stone, oval and pale as milk. It must have washed down from the hills during the rain. She turned it over in her paw, smiling faintly at the cool feel of it. Pretty thing, she murmured, setting it on a nearby rock to dry. Behind her came the sound of shuffling paws. The mole appeared, his fur still damp, his whiskers twitching irritably. The tunnels flooded halfway through the night, he said, sniffing at the air. I've been up since dawn clearing them. I'm sorry to hear that, said the hare gently. But at least the rain's ended. The mole grunted. For now, the ground's so wet I can hardly dig. I've had to build little bridges out of twigs just to keep my paws dry. The hare smiled. Would you like some tea? I've just boiled water. The mole hesitated, then nodded. I won't say no to warmth. They sat together outside her burrow, sipping tea from small, chipped cups. Steam curled between them. The forest was quiet except for the soft dripping of water and the distant trill of a thrush somewhere up the hill. You see that stone? Said the hare, pointing toward it. Washed down overnight. The mole squinted. Looks smooth enough to skip across the brook. Maybe I'll keep it, said the hare. A small reminder of the storm. The mole shrugged. A storm leaves plenty of reminders. Most of them muddy. She laughed softly. You always find the practical in everything. And someone should, said the mole. You'd have the forest full of keepsakes otherwise. They sat in silence for a while, watching the mist lift. Across the clearing, the hedgehog appeared, his spine still damp, carrying a small woven basket. Morning, he called, voice low but cheerful. Thought I'd check on the two of you after that downpour. All fine here, said the hare. Except the mole's been digging ditches again. Flood control, muttered the mole. The hedgehog chuckled and joined them. The rain brought down a few branches near my den. I'll need to clear them before they mildew. But the air smells lovely this morning, all cedar and soil. He set his basket down, uncovering a few small loaves wrapped in leaves. Baked these yesterday before the storm. Fig and nut. The hare's ears perked. That sounds perfect. They shared the bread, warm and soft, with the faint sweetness of figs and a subtle crunch of walnuts. The hare spread a touch of honey across hers, and they ate in companionable quiet, watching the sun slowly pierce the mist. A squirrel chattered from the trees, scolding no one in particular, and the hedgehog smiled. Sounds like the forest back to its usual chatter. It always finds its rhythm again, said the hare, even after the hardest rain. By midday, the air had grown warm, heavy with the scent of drying leaves. The hare went down to the brook again, her pail in hand. The current had slowed now, but the water was still higher than usual, swirling with bits of bark and fern. She noticed a log caught against the bend, half submerged. Something about the way it shifted drew her closer. She stepped onto a stone, leaning carefully, and there, tangled among the roots, was a small wooden box. It looked old, the wood darkened by water, moss clinging to its sides. She glanced up and down the brook. "Now where did you come from?" she whispered. With some effort, she pulled it free, water streaming from its edges. It was light, maybe hollow inside, with a thin latch at the front. She turned it in her paws, feeling the worn grain beneath her fingertips. She thought of the mole, but he was still likely underground. The hedgehog had gone home. The sparrow would be flitting somewhere above. So she carried it back to her burrow, setting it gently on the table. Inside, she brewed another cup of tea and sat staring at the box. She wasn't curious in the restless way some creatures were, but there was something about finding such a thing after a storm that felt deliberate, almost like a message. She took a deep breath and lifted the latch. The lid creaked open to reveal a bundle of papers tied with string, their edges curled from damp. There was also a small carving, a tiny bird, smooth and pale, its wings tucked close to its sides. She touched it softly. Whoever made it had cared for the details. The fine feathers, the slight tilt of the beak, the smooth polish of the wood. It was the sort of thing crafted by steady paws and patient eyes. She untied the papers carefully and spread them out. Most were ruined, ink blurred into gray clouds, but a few words could still be made out, to be delivered before the frost and safe passage through the valley. The hare frowned, tracing the faded lines. Letters? Or perhaps notes of some kind. When the hedgehog stopped by later that afternoon, he found her still staring at the little wooden bird. "What's that?" he asked, setting down his walking stick. "Something the brook gave back," she said. "It was caught against the bend. There were papers inside, too, but most unreadable." The hedgehog peered at it. "Looks like good craftsmanship. Could be from the old cottages by the far stream. They used to send small things downriver in sealed tins, messages, recipes, sometimes bits of handiwork for trade. I suppose the rain might have loosened one from the banks," she mused. "Quite possible," said the hedgehog. "Still, it's a fine find. You should keep it." She nodded, setting it carefully on the windowsill where the last of the light could touch it. "It feels right here," she said softly. That night, as the forest cooled, she sat by her small lamp, looking at the wooden bird. The shadows of its wings stretched long across the wall. It reminded her of the sparrow, small, bright, and restless, though this one would never move again. Outside, the forest was alive with sound. Frogs calling near the water, the occasional flutter of wings, the deep murmur of wind moving through wet leaves. It was the same every night, and yet it felt different now, touched by the quiet weight of what had drifted her way. Morning broke clear and golden. The hare rose before the sun had fully lifted, driven by a restlessness she couldn't quite name. She packed a small satchel, a bit of bread, an apple, her water flask, and slipped outside. The hedgehog had been right. If the box had come from the far stream, perhaps something more had been carried along with it. She decided to follow the brook upstream, just for the morning, to see what the storm had changed. Mist hung low again, though thinner than the day before. Her paws sank softly into the damp soil as she walked, the sound of the brook constant beside her, always moving, always whispering. She passed clusters of mushrooms sprouting from old logs, the caps glistening like varnish. Ferns unfurled beside the path, their fronds trembling in the slight breeze. Overhead, a jay called once, sharp and distant. After some time, the path widened into a clearing where the brook curved sharply, tumbling over a small fall of stones. She crouched to drink, then noticed more debris caught in the reeds. A broken bit of basket, a twist of twine, and a flat piece of bark carved faintly with letters. She lifted it carefully. The markings were crude but legible. To the one who keeps watch by the elm. She turned it over, brow furrowing. The words were shallow, as if made in haste. The storm must have washed it loose along with the box. It wasn't the kind of mystery she'd ever sought, and yet she felt the same gentle pull she'd felt when she found the stone or the bird. A tug at the quiet center of her that told her this small thing mattered, even if only in some private, forest-born way. By the time she returned home, the sun was high. The sparrow had come again, perched near the door. "You've been gone long," she said. "I went walking upstream," replied the hare. "The brook's been busy." She showed her the bit of bark, and the sparrow tilted her head, reading aloud. "To the one who keeps watch by the elm." How mysterious. "I don't think it's meant for me," said the hare. "But I suppose it doesn't matter who finds it now. The message has already done its traveling." The sparrow fluttered her wings. "And what will you do with it?" "Keep it," said the hare simply. "Along with the bird. The forest gives what it chooses to give." They shared lunch, berries and a bit of bread, while the light shifted through the leaves. The day stretched on, slow and golden. When the sparrow left, the hare returned to her doorway, gazing at the brook, now calm and bright once more. The carved bird sat still on her windowsill, watching too. The light caught its wooden feathers, and for a moment it looked almost alive, as though in its silence it understood something she did not. The hare smiled faintly, breathed deep, and went to put the kettle on again. For now, that was enough. The next morning dawned cool and gray, the kind of light that softened the edges of everything it touched. Mist wove through the undergrowth like thread, and droplets clung to every blade and leaf. The hare woke before the sun fully crested the hill, a restlessness humming faintly beneath her calm. She dressed simply, wrapped a bit of oat bread in cloth, and slipped the carved bird into her satchel. It felt like the right day to follow the brook further, to see where the carving's message might lead. The forest still smelled of rain, fresh, clean, and faintly sweet. Her paws left faint prints in the soft soil as she made her way along the water's edge. The brook chattered beside her, sometimes gentle, sometimes tumbling over stones with a deeper murmur. The sound kept her company, steady as breathing. After a while, she reached the place where the trees grew older, their trunks gnarled and thick. Moss blanketed the roots like soft green fur, and here and there, the ground opened in small hollows filled with ferns. Birds sang above, their calls echoing faintly. It was in this part of the forest that the elm stood, a great old tree by a curve in the brook, its roots twisting down into the water. She remembered it from her walks in spring, when the ground had been bright with violets. Now, the earth beneath it was damp and dark, scattered with fallen leaves that clung to her paws. The elm's bark was deeply ridged, like 1,000 tiny rivers running downward. She approached slowly, feeling a quiet sense of reverence. "To the one who keeps watch by the elm," she murmured, brushing a paw over the trunk. There was no one here, only the steady drip of water and the faint hum of life all around. But the hare had learned to trust the silence of the woods. Sometimes it spoke louder than words. She knelt near the base of the tree, where the roots formed a shallow hollow. Something pale caught her eye, a bit of cloth frayed and damp. She reached for it and uncovered a small, weathered pouch. Inside were a few smooth stones, each engraved with a faint mark: a leaf, a wave, a sun, a star. She turned them over slowly. "Messages," she whispered. But from whom? Footsteps rustled behind her, soft and deliberate. She turned to see the badger, his fur brushed and neat despite the damp. a bundle of kindling slung over his shoulder. "Morning," he said, lowering his load. "You're far from home, aren't you?" "I followed the brook," she said. "Found this under the elm." The badger crouched beside her, examining the pouch. "I know these," he said after a moment. "Old markers. The otters used to carve them generations ago. Left them by the water when they cleared a path or found safe crossing. The marks meant things. A leaf for shelter, a sun for warmth, the wave for deep water. And the star?" asked the hare. He smiled faintly. "That one meant watch. As in, someone's here." The hare's ears flicked. "So this was a message to another?" "Most likely," said the badger, "though whoever was meant for has long since moved on. The floods probably unearthed what was buried." She looked down at the stones again. "Still, they found their way back into the light. Maybe that's enough." "Maybe so," said the badger. They sat beneath the elm for a time, the forest shifting quietly around them. The wind picked up, brushing through the leaves with a sound like a sigh. The badger poured them both a little tea from his flask, smoky and rich, steeped with herbs. They drank slowly, the warmth seeping through their paws. When the sun finally broke through the gray, a shaft of light fell across the brook, catching on the water's surface and scattering gold. The hare set the stones on the roots, arranging them neatly. "Let them stay here," she said. "They belong to the tree now." The badger nodded. "Everything finds a place in time." They rose and walked together for a while, following the brook as it wound deeper into the trees. The air was lighter now, the mist burning away. Small insects darted in the sunlight, and the first dragonflies of the season skimmed the surface of the water, their wings glinting like glass. At a bend in the brook, they parted ways, the badger heading east to gather more kindling, the hare continuing upstream. By midday, she reached a wide clearing she hadn't seen before. The storm had toppled a large tree across the brook, forming a natural bridge. She crossed carefully, her reflection rippling beneath her. On the far side, she found the remnants of an old camp, a ring of stones blackened by fire, a few broken twigs that might once have been a frame for shelter. Time and weather had worn it down to almost nothing, but the shape of it still lingered. She knelt, brushing away leaves. Beneath the ash and soil, she found another carving, a piece of driftwood etched with the outline of a bird in flight. Her breath caught slightly. It matched the little wooden burr in her burrow almost exactly. The same lines, the same curve of the wings. Whoever had carved one had carved the other. For a moment, she imagined them here. Whoever had sat beside this small fire, carving by lamplight or moonlight, listening to the brook the same way she was now. Perhaps a traveler, perhaps someone who'd left their messages behind for others to find. She ran her paw over the smooth lines, then tucked it gently into her satchel beside the first bird. When she turned to go, a soft sound stopped her, a flutter and a chirp. The sparrow landed nearby, feathers ruffled from flight. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking for you half the morning. The hedgehog's convinced you've gone wandering into the next valley." "Not quite," said the hare, smiling. "Just following where the brook led me." The sparrow hopped closer, tilting her head. "You always do that. Follow quiet things until they tell you something." "Do they ever?" The sparrow chirped thoughtfully. "Maybe not in words, but they seem to make you listen better than most." They sat for a while at the edge of the clearing, watching the light play on the water. The air had grown warmer, and the smell of damp leaves mixed with sun-warmed grass. "Do you think whoever was here meant to leave all this behind?" asked the hare softly. "Maybe they meant to share it," said the sparrow. "The forest keeps stories in its pockets, stones, carvings, feathers. They wait for someone to pick them up again." The hare smiled. "Then I suppose I'm the one who listens for pockets." The sparrow laughed. "And I'll be the one who tells the others what you find." They began their walk home as the afternoon lengthened, the forest alive with small noises, A rustle here, a splash there, the distant creak of trees shifting in the soft wind. The brook followed beside them, calmer now, its voice steady. When they reached the elm again, the hare paused. The light was low, turning the water bronze. The stone she'd left glimmered faintly among the roots. She thought of the words on the bark, "To the one who keeps watch by the elm," and smiled. Perhaps that watcher had never been a single creature, but rather the elm itself, standing through seasons and storms, quietly witnessing everything that came and went. When they finally reached the meadow, the air had cooled. The hare lit her small lamp and placed the two carved birds together on her shelf. They faced the same direction, wings poised mid-motion, as though ready to lift into flight at any moment. Outside, the forest breathed slowly, dusk deepening into indigo. The first fireflies flickered among the reeds, and the smell of wet grass drifted through the open window. The hare sat at her table, tracing the rim of her teacup, the soft murmur of the brook still in her ears. She didn't need to understand everything she'd found. Some stories, she thought, were meant only to be felt, the kind that leave you quieter than before, but full. She poured herself another cup of tea, leaned back, and listened to the gentle rhythm of night settling in. Late summer came with a soft kind of heaviness. The days stretched long and warm, and the air hung with the scent of ripening berries and wild thyme. The forest had grown thick and lush, pathways narrowing under ferns, sunlight dappled like honey through the canopy. For a few weeks, life had been calm again. The hare spent her mornings tending to the small garden behind her burrow, pulling weeds and collecting herbs for drying. The hedgehog came by often, bringing handfuls of mint and gossip from down by the lane. "Did you hear?" the hedgehog said one morning, setting down a basket of gooseberries. "The bridge near the birches is gone. The rains last night washed half of it away. The wooden one over the brook? That's the one. The fox says it'll take a few of us to mend it before the next storm." The hare wiped her paws on her apron. "Then we'd best not wait too long." So they went. The hedgehog, the hare, the fox, and later the badger, lumbering along with a hammer and a coil of rope. The brook ran fuller than usual, its banks soft and gleaming. Where the bridge had stood, only one side remained intact, the other twisted and half-submerged. They stood for a moment, quietly taking in the damage. "It's not too bad," said the fox, running a paw along the beam. "A few new planks, some steady nails, and we'll have it sound again." The badger nodded. "I've some timber stacked behind the shed. We'll fetch it." "Good," said the hare. "It's worth the work. The bridge makes crossing safer when the rains come." They set to it together. The hedgehog gathered smaller branches and brambles to clear the path. The fox and hare measured and cut new boards. The badger, strong and patient, steadied each piece as they nailed it into place. The day grew warm, the sun thick overhead. Every so often they stopped for water or to share a handful of berries the hedgehog had brought along. Birds flitted through the branches above, curious at the noise. By mid-afternoon, the bridge began to take shape again, sturdy, simple, built with care. The brook flowed beneath it, carrying along a few fallen leaves that glimmered gold in the light. When they stepped back to look at their work, the hare smiled faintly. "It's better than before," she said. "It'll hold for years," said the badger, "until we're all gray and stooped." The fox grinned. "Speak for yourself. I intend to stay handsome." The hedgehog chuckled, setting down her tools. "You'll be too busy brushing your tail to notice your back giving out." They laughed together, a sound bright and unhurried, mingling with the water's steady voice. Afterward, they sat in the shade to rest. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that slows even the birds. The hare pulled from her satchel a small loaf of oat bread and a bit of cheese wrapped in leaves, and they shared it between them. The fox brought out some dried apples, sweet and crisp, and passed them around. No one spoke much. They didn't need to. The sound of the brook and the hum of insects filled the silence perfectly. Then, as they finished eating, the wind shifted. It carried a strange weight, cooler, sharper, tinged with the smell of rain far off. The hare looked up. The sky to the west had darkened, not with dusk, but with clouds piling high and fast. The badger squinted. Storm coming. A heavy one. We should get back, said the hare. They hurried to gather their tools, crossing the new bridge one by one. By the time they reached the first line of trees, the wind had begun to sing through the branches, long, low notes that made the leaves tremble. The first drops fell soon after, slow, fat, and cold. Then the rain came in earnest, drumming against the earth. The forest blurred in silver sheets. They ran the last stretch together, laughing between gasps of breath, first slicked and dripping. The hare's burrow was closest, so they ducked inside, shaking off the rain like a band of stray travelers. The small home filled with warmth and noise, the sound of damp paws on the floor, the kettle being set on the stove, the softest of steam. The hare handed out towels, then poured hot water over herbs, the scent of chamomile and mint filling the air. They settled on cushions by the window, watching the storm thrash the trees outside. It was beautiful in a wild, living way, branches bending, rain running in rivulets down the glass, lightning flashing faintly in the distance. The fox leaned back with a sigh. Can't say I mind the rain, as long as there's a roof and something warm to drink. Or a friend to share it with, said the hedgehog. The hare smiled, setting her cup down. That's the thing about storms. They make you notice what's near. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the storm pass in waves. Eventually, the thunder softened, the rain slowed, and the forest outside began to breathe again. When the last drops faded into a soft drizzle, the air turned cool and fresh, full of the scent of wet earth and pine. The fox stood, stretching. I'll head home before it gets too dark, he said. The path will be muddy, but the sky's clearing. The hedgehog and badger followed soon after, each pausing at the door to thank the hare. When the burrow was quiet again, she stood for a while at the window, looking out over the glistening world. The new bridge, though hidden beyond the trees, felt solid in her mind, a reminder that even what breaks can be mended if enough paws lend help. She set her cup down, tidied the table, and went to light her lamp. Outside, the clouds parted, and a strip of orange sunlight slipped across the meadow, the kind of light that comes only after rain, tender and golden, touching everything as though an apology. She stood there for a long time, breathing it in. 2 days later, when the sun had dried the last of the puddles and the air smelled faintly of mushrooms and damp bark, a visitor arrived. The hare was sorting herbs on her table when a gentle knock came at the door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. She opened it to find a stoat standing there, travel-worn and damp around the edges, a small pack slung across his shoulder. Good afternoon, he said politely, removing his cap. I hope I'm not intruding. The fox said you might lend a bit of help. Come in, said the hare. You look half-soaked. Only from the marsh path, he said with a faint grin. The ground still soft from the rains. Inside, he warmed himself by the stove while the hare poured tea. His fur, once white in winter, had turned soft brown now, blending with the forest tones. His eyes, quick and bright, darted curiously around the burrow, taking in the shelves lined with dried flowers, the bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, the gentle clutter of books and tools. I'm from a hollow beyond the pines, he said once he'd settled. The storm took down one of our roof beams. We've patched what we could, but the badger said you'd know where to find dry bark strips for binding. I do, said the hare, nodding. There's a stand of birch near the ridge. The outer bark stays dry even through rain. I'll show you tomorrow morning. That would be a kindness, said the stoat. I've never been through that way before. He stayed for supper, vegetable stew thick with barley and carrots, served with oat bread and butter. As they ate, he told stories from the hollow, of quiet streams, of an owl who kept a lamp lit through the night, of frogs who sang so loudly after rain they drowned out the crickets. The hare listened with interest, her spoon moving slowly through her bowl. "You live a quieter life here," said the stoat, glancing around. "I think I'd like that." "It's quiet, yes," said the hare, "but never lonely. The forest makes sure of that." When night came, she offered him a cot by the window. Outside, the air was still, the kind of stillness that hums faintly, alive but hushed. Fireflies moved among the reeds again, their lights rising and falling like breath. The stoat fell asleep quickly, worn from travel. The hare sat a while longer, writing notes by lamplight, about the birch stand, about the hollow she'd not yet seen, about how the brook still carried a trace of storm in its sound. When she finally blew out the lamp, the dark felt soft, full of hidden movement, the slow turning of the forest toward another day. The morning came with a sky the color of pale linen, light and clear after so many wet days. The hare woke to the faint smell of dew on the grass and the soft murmur of the brook just beyond her window. She dressed simply, tying her satchel at her waist, and stepped outside. The stoat was already awake, standing by the edge of the garden with his paws in his pockets, watching the mist lift from meadow. His coat gleamed faintly in the early light, and his expression was calm, almost boyish in its curiosity. "Morning," he said when he saw her. "It's quieter here than the hollow. Even the wind sounds softer." "It's the trees," said the hare, handing him a small piece of bread spread with berry jam. "They hold the air in place." He smiled and took it gratefully. Together, they set off toward the ridge. The forest was alive in its morning rhythm. Thrushes calling from high branches, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, the low hum of bees over wildflowers. Their path wound through the undergrowth, the ground soft underfoot, flecked with fallen petals. The air smelled of pine resin and damp bark. They didn't speak much at first. The stoat seemed content to take it all in. The shifting light, the sound of the brook that followed them for a while, the texture of moss under his paws. After some time, he said, "It's strange. You can live not more than a day's walk apart and still feel you're in a different world. Our hollow's all shadow and stone and reeds. Here, everything feels lighter. Every place carries its own sort of quiet," said the hare. "You just have to listen long enough to notice what kind." He nodded thoughtfully, and they walked on. The climb to the birch ridge wasn't steep, but it wound upward through dappled clearings where sunlight slipped between the trunks in long, thin beams. The birch trees stood close together, their white bark marked with dark rings and scars. The wind moved through their leaves with a sound like distant rain. The hare stopped near a fallen tree, where the bark had peeled away in wide, clean strips. She knelt, running her paw over the dry surface. "Here," she said, "this will do." The stoat crouched beside her, feeling the texture. "It's tough," he said, impressed, "but light." "Birch bark is strong and doesn't rot easily," she said. "The outer layer will bind the beam well once it's dried." Together, they worked quietly, cutting and rolling the bark into neat coils. The stoat tied them with lengths of reed he'd brought in his pack. Every so often, they paused to sip from a flask of cool water or rest under the shade. Around midday, the forest opened into a small plateau overlooking the valley. They sat there, eating what they'd brought: oat biscuits, sliced apples, a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. Below them, the trees spread out like a green ocean, the brook glinting faintly as it wound through the distance. "It's beautiful," said the stoat softly. "You can see the whole wood from here." The hare nodded. "I come here when I need reminding how big the world is, and how small the things that trouble me really are." He smiled faintly. I could use that kind of reminder. They lingered a while, watching the wind ripple through the canopy below until the shadows grew longer and the air turned cool. Then they gathered their bundles and started back down the path. As they walked, the stoats said, "You know, I didn't think I'd enjoy quiet this much. In the hollow, there's always something to fix or fetch. Here, time moves like the brook, slow but sure." The hare smiled. "That's the forest's way of teaching you to rest. It doesn't rush. It waits for you to notice." When they reached the meadow again, evening had begun to settle, the sky blushing faintly pink and gold. Crickets started their song early, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and river mist. The hare helped the stoats store the bark in her shed to be carried home in the morning. Then they shared one last cup of tea on the step, steam curling into the cooling air. "Thank you," said the stoat quietly, "for the help and the company. You'll always have both here," she said. "That's what the woods are for." He smiled at that, a small, contented smile, and they sat a little longer, watching the fireflies appear one by one among the reeds. The next morning, they set off early again, this time heading south toward the stoat's home beyond the pines. The air was fresh, bright with birdsong. The hare carried her walking stick, and the stoat bore the bundle of bark over his shoulder. Their path wound through new stretches of forest, darker here, the ground softer and covered with thick moss. The trees grew taller, their roots rising like old bones from the soil. The hare noticed how the light shifted as they went, less golden, more silver, filtered through narrower spaces. After an hour's walk, they came to the marshland that bordered the hollow, a wide stretch of reeds and shallow pools that mirrored the sky. The air buzzed with insects and the low croak of frogs. Narrow planks had been laid here and there across the wettest ground, though some wobbled under their weight. The stoat led confidently, balancing as he crossed. The hare followed with careful steps, her reflection wavering in the still water below. "Not far now," said the stoat. "You'll see the roofs just ahead." Sure enough, the path rose slightly, and soon the hollow opened before them. A small cluster of burrows and timber huts set into the hillside. Smoke rose gently from a few chimneys, and the faint scent of stew drifted on the air. It was quieter than the hare had imagined, though alive in its own steady rhythm. A vole sweeping a step, a weasel patching a wall, the creak of a wheelbarrow somewhere beyond. The stoat led her to one of the larger huts near the edge of the clearing. The roof beam had indeed cracked, splintered where it met the wall. "Storm got us bad," he said, setting down his bundle. "But with this, we can mend it before the next one finds us." The hare helped him fit the bark strips into place while others came to lend paws, a mole bringing twine, a weasel with a mallet, even a young squirrel eager to learn. Together, they worked until the new bindings were snug and firm. When they finished, the stoat stood back, brushing the dust from his fur. "That'll hold," he said proudly. "It's good work." "It's better than good," said the mole. "It's clever. The bark will breathe with the wood." The hare smiled quietly. Sometimes nature leaves us all the tools we need. We just have to remember where to look. That evening, the hollow gathered for a simple meal. Vegetable stew simmered in a wide pot, served with bread baked that morning. The hare was given a place beside the fire, the warmth of it soft against her fur. Around her, voices rose and fell in gentle talk, not loud but content. The stoat brought her a small bowl filled to the brim. "We don't often get guests," he said. "You've given us more help than we could have asked for." She accepted the bowl with a small nod. "It's what neighbors are for." As the night deepened, lamps were lit, small ones, glowing amber through thin shades of bark and glass. Shadows played softly across the walls. A few of the younger ones began humming a tune, low and rhythmic, the kind that sounds like walking under trees. The hare closed her eyes and listened. It reminded her of her own home, The brook outside, the scent of mint drying above the stove, the rustle of leaves at the window. Different sounds, same peace. When she opened her eyes again, the stoat was looking at her with a quiet gratitude. "You'll stay the night?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "If you'll have me. Always." And so she did. She slept in a small cot near the door, wrapped in a soft blanket that smelled faintly of hay and smoke. The night sounds of the hollow were different, deeper, closer, the slow bubbling of water through reeds and the faint murmur of creatures turning in sleep. Before drifting off, she thought of the elm by the brook, of the stones beneath its roots, of the bridge that now stood strong again. The forest, she realized, wasn't a single place. It was many small worlds touching edges, each keeping watch over the other. And with that thought, she slept. The soft breath of the marsh and the whisper of wind through birch leaves carrying her gently into dreams. The end. Thank you for wandering through the woods with me. If you'd like to return for more quiet stories and soft moments, don't forget to follow the trail back. Like, subscribe, and I'll meet you again under the green canopy soon.